Welcome everyone. Welcome to the launch of the Digital Equity and Education Report, a New South Wales case study. It is a collaboration by the Whitlam Institute, the Centre for Western Sydney and Wester'ly. So welcome to all of those organisations. My name is Fran. I will be your host for tonight's proceedings. And before I start, it would be my great pleasure to introduce to you Matilda Harry to do an acknowledgement of country. Matilda is a proud Wiradjuri woman. She's devoted to increasing the educational opportunities and independence of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families and communities from right around Western Sydney. She's also a high-achieving PhD candidate here at Western Sydney, and I could go on, but I won't embarrass her while she's standing up there, so please welcome Matilda.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be joining you tonight at the launch of the Digital Equity and Education Report as a researcher, a teacher across Western Sydney schools and schools in the Northern Territory, and a young person who grew up with limited to no access to devices, the internet, and essential digital literacy skills. I truly understand the importance of this research and the changes and actions that this report will hopefully drive. As a Western Sydney kid, I'm lucky enough to know many of you, but for those of you who don't know me, Yuma Dumarang Yuan Nadi Matilda Harry, Baladu Radri Gimi Malinyan Yinya Vadu Gilling Radri Narambang. My name's Matilda and I'm a proud Wiradjuri woman. So my mob's ancestral and spiritual connections are to the central west of New South Wales, a little country town called Kandos. But tonight I'm a visitor on Parramatta country and I have the honour of acknowledging that we're meeting here on sovereign and unceded Nora of the Darug Nation. So I acknowledge and honour country tonight with permission from Darug elders who, like all of my elders, have been really pivotal in my learnings of language, of cultural protocols and practices. So I'd like to start by paying my utmost respects to Parramatta elders, to the ancestors, the lands and waterways here. I express my sincerest gratitude to Parramatta leaders, to warriors, to healers and peacekeepers of our past, of the present and the young ones emerging, for allowing us all to continue our business here tonight on their land. And I also acknowledge all mob in the room and your elders' courage and foresight. Now, our Parramatta elders are incredibly generous as they continue to share the dreaming of this place, of the cultural and spiritual practices of trade and teaching that's been ongoing here for tens of thousands of years. They speak of as custodians of land where the salt and fresh waters meet, stretching along the Parramatta River. They help us situate ourselves on country as they yarn about the salt marshes that shelter the waterbirds, and how at high tide crabs would be and are still caught and fish are easily speared. Of the eels that have totemic connection that have swum and spawned here for generations. They continue to share stories of cave paintings, rock shelters, stone artefacts and scarred trees that are still here today, standing strong. Of shell middens that are seen just down the road, sites where our mob have feasted and lived dating back over 20,000 years. Us young ones learn stories of cultural survival and thrivance. Just here where we are tonight, stories of great warriors of Pemaway, considered by our old people as a clever man and one of the most significant Indigenous warriors leading ongoing resistance to colonisation. It was here that he engaged in arguably the most substantial early confrontation in our region, dating back to April in 1794, the Battle of Parramatta, where he alongside 100 Indigenous warriors fought for his lands and people. This country is and always has been a place of high dreaming, and as a Wiradjuri woman and visitor on these lands, I pledge to tread lightly. And I ask each of you tonight to please walk with what my late pop and my Wiradjuri elders have instilled in me, and that's to walk with Yindiamara, to walk with respect, value and care for country for generations to come. Now, there's no better place to hold an event of such esteem than right here, and tonight I'm really looking forward to learning more about digital equity and the upcoming opportunities that we have to ensure equitable access, affordability and the ability to safely use devices and the internet. As a local educator, I see firsthand the many students in my classrooms that are at risk of falling behind in schools, in uni and beyond, and without immediate action. So let us continue such important yarns about necessary steps moving forward towards boosting digital inclusion to meet the demands of modern education and build a more equitable future, to ensure every student, regardless of background or location, has the necessary tools to thrive in an increasingly digital world. To the research team, to Rhonda, Gina, Tanya, congratulations again on this research and the report. What a massive effort you guys have put in to survey over 445 New South Wales school staff between April and June this year. As you know, I'm always a massive fan of your work, and I actually had the pleasure of collaborating with the team on a similar but different project studying First Nations digital inclusion in Western Sydney. You guys never fail to ask critical questions and to share really place-based insights. So thank you for all that you do, to the event partners, to the dignitaries, to all of you. Thank you for bringing an amazing energy into this room. And I hope you all have a fabulous night. And on that note, I say, Mendengu wu yanagumai dijirum. May my ancestors walk with you all in good spirit. Thank you.
Thank you, Matilda. That was wonderful. Western Sydney must be very proud to have you as part of their PhD program. And thank you for reminding us whose land we're on. I have to say, I normally don't really launch reports very much, but I cannot say no to the Whitlam Institute or to Rhonda. And I, in particular, can't say no when it has to do with Western Sydney and with education in Western Sydney. And that's partly because of my background and where I've come from, which is my parents migrated to Australia in 1989 from Lebanon, and English is actually my second language. When we first arrived, we were, like most immigrants, not very financially well off. Some might call us of low socioeconomic background. And for me, I think the single biggest deciding factor in my successes, if you will, it's certainly not the only factor, but it is by far the most significant, has been access to a good, decent education. And that started at primary school and it continued to high school and then it continued to tertiary education. And if I did not have the access to the education that I had, I would not be in the position that I am today. It is as simple as that. And so to read a report like this, I must say it was quite difficult reading that 70% of students who come from socioeconomic background face digital exclusion. In a time where we would think that the internet is quite ubiquitous and easily accessible and there for everyone, and we don't really think too much about it. Because I'm a millennial, I tend to get all of my information and morality from memes. And I saw this meme once. Everybody knows Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, it starts as the big pyramid and the main need is here at the bottom. It's the physiological need, food, shelter, all the rest of it. Someone had added an even more pressing need under the biological need, and they had just scribbled internet. And I think that was, very telling, that the internet is almost something that we need for survival more than food, more than water, more than shelter. Of course, not literally, but that is how much it plays a role in our life. So to think that there are those refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, those of low socioeconomic background, those in regional areas, those who live in the suburbs of Western Sydney who don't have the same access in the year 2024 is outstanding. And outstanding? No, that was the wrong word. Terrible. What's the word I'm looking for, John? Astounding. Yeah, okay. Looks like I didn't have a good education after all. So hopefully that's why we're here, to understand exactly the scope of the issue and certainly to work out how to rectify it, because I think that it is rectifiable, and we've got some of the best minds in the room working on this issue, and we're going to hear from them a little bit later. But before we do that, I would like to introduce to you Distinguished Professor George Williams. Many of you will know George. He is the Vice-Chancellor and the President of Western Sydney University. He's also a very tireless advocate for education. His leadership ensures that every student, regardless of their background, has the opportunity to thrive. He's also one of Australia's preeminent experts in constitutional law. He's made very significant contributions both nationally and internationally in the area of human rights, federalism, international justice, electoral law and national security. Would you like me to go on? I've got a pretty long... No, you sure? You good? All right. Well, please welcome to the podium Distinguished Professor George Williams.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Matilda, for that very generous acknowledgement and welcome to country. I also pay my respects to the Parramatta people of the Darug Nation and to elders past and present. Can I also acknowledge our dignitaries here tonight, the Honourable Jihad, the Member for Bankstown, Minister for Customer Service and Digital Government, Minister for Emergency Services, Minister for Youth Justice. Not quite as many portfolios as Scott Morrison, but not far off, I would have to say. Fair enough. Charishma, Kaliyanda, the member for Liverpool, and of course a wonderful member of our Whitlam Institute board. We thank you for your contributions to our university. Nathan Hegarty, the Minister for Leppington, and John Faulkner, who of course has reached the pinnacle of his career as chair of the Whitlam Institute. Thank you, John, for joining us tonight. It's a real pleasure to be here to help with the launch of this report and to welcome our guests. I have read this work and it's a landmark and important work in our understanding of education in Western Sydney. And as the kind introduction indicated, my job is to ensure that people thrive, that people can get an education. And what this report demonstrates is very often that is not the case. Very often people are not receiving the opportunities they need to thrive, not just in university, but of course in primary school and high school. And so for any community that has as its goal empowering students, providing access to education, this report is very sobering reading and very necessary reading about the deep divides in our community. And I see that every day in speaking to our students. I've been focused on very basic issues such as food on our campus, where 1 in 2 of our students is saying they have food insecurity. 1 in 2 of our students are saying that they might have to come to class hungry 1 or more times a week. 1 in 2 of our students are saying that they're considering dropping out of their studies because they cannot afford food, something as basic as that. And hence we have Western pantries. We provide free rice, oats and other staples. And as a university, we're in both the food and the education business, because without food you cannot study. But I've got to add to my list digital literacy and digital engagement as one of those other absolutely vital and necessary things that as a university we have to grapple with, because there's no doubt, as this report shows, that unless we take this to heart, that we will be unable to fulfil our mission of making sure that we provide access to education for all. I'd also say this is particularly important for us at Western Sydney University. We are on the coalface of social mobility. 2/3 of our students are first in family to go to university. We have the largest number of students in the country from low SES backgrounds. We have the largest number of students in the country from non-English speaking backgrounds. We have the largest number of students who will be suffering the digital divide that this report identifies. And again, for me, this is necessary and compelling reading to understand what we need to do to enable our students to thrive at university. When I think about what I can learn from the report, and really I see it as a call to action. We need to act on the basis of this to fix these problems. The starting point for me actually is something as simple as don't make assumptions. And I was quite challenged in this report because it challenged a number of my assumptions about the ubiquity of the internet. And I think that's one of those myths in our society that everyone's got access to the internet in some form. And I must admit that was where I started before reading this report. And you know, that position is wrong and cannot be maintained. And I think that's the power of this report in forcing us to reconsider our assumptions. And I think what it says to me is the assumption's got to be, particularly at Western Sydney University, that our students don't have access. And we need to ask those questions about what we need to do to support them. And in particular, it identifies particular communities who are less likely to have access than others. And again, there's questions we need to ask and we need to act on the basis of that. The other key thing for me about assumptions in this report is don't assume, even if they've got access, what that access amounts to. And the fact that many of our students may be completing 3 or more years study where the best they've got is a mobile phone, again, is highly significant. Your ability to study complex, lengthy material, in my case, like hundreds of pages of a High Court case, is very, very difficult if the best you've got is a mobile phone, maybe with a flaky connection, and maybe a limited data plan. So again, I think we have to question what we're doing in these areas, because for many people, mobile phone may be the best they've got. And frankly, that's pretty inadequate for the sort of ways we provide materials to our students. And again, I think we need to ask, can we do better there? The reason we need to do better is because we are seeing a quite high dropout from our university. Our retention is a real problem. Food is one of those issues, frontline, but digital access is clearly another. And in our case, we're seeing large numbers of students, thousands of students who are not completing their studies because they simply are unable to get through for digital reasons, sometimes family, financial and other reasons. And that's not just a massive lost opportunity to our community, but it has a dramatic impact on social cohesion. People who come to university and leave without a degree but with a large debt is a major problem. And if we're really serious about building a fair and equitable society, we've got to help our students get through their studies. And the evidence is absolutely clear. If that happens, they go into great lives, opportunity opens up. If they don't, it's a fork in the road. And again, this report shows one of the key drivers of the negative fork in the road. So I'd just say from my perspective as Vice-Chancellor of Western Sydney University, I welcome this report. I welcome the fact that it's sobering, important reading. I do see it as a call to action. And I'd say to our partners in the room, we'd like you to partner with you in helping to solve these problems. We cannot do so alone. It takes not just us, but community, government, business, a wide coalition prepared to address these issues. And we'd love to talk to the people in this room about how we can work together. Because I think together we can make a massive difference. This report identifies the problem, identifies where we need to intervene, and the key now is, can we get together to do so? So I commend the report. Thank you particularly to the Minister for coming to launch. I know he's got a key family event, so he does us a great honour by choosing us also to come and launch this report tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Williams. And I'm not surprised that you also mentioned that detail that I also noted in the report, which is that you have students that only have a mobile phone. And so when you're doing your studies and trying to write your essays and trying to do what I imagine might be science or maths or any subject, to do it on such a small device, on a shaky connection, is, I would say, not only impossible, but a hindrance, actually, to you learning. Our next speaker is the Honourable Minister. We are now your family. Thank you for foregoing your family over this family. I don't know if this event is as fun as the one that you're about to go to or not, but we very much appreciate you being here. Don't worry, I'm from a Lebanese family too. Sometimes you don't want to go to those things. It's true. It's true. But for those of you who don't know the Honourable Chair Deeb, he's the member for Bankstown. He is also a dedicated and very passionate advocate for community education and equality. He is currently the Minister for Customer Service and Digital Government and the Minister for Emergency Services and Youth Justice. You're right, he does have quite a lot of portfolios. Before entering Parliament, he was the principal at Punchbowl Boys High School. You may know him as having transformed the school. I feel like I know you because I've seen the SBS series The Principal, which I'm absolutely convinced is based on you. So welcome Jihad Dib to the stage, except for one bit.
Well, thanks so much, Fran, and thank you for a lovely intro. And yes, you come from a Lebanese family. You know that the thing that they will do when I finally get there is guilt me until I never forget it. Because if there's one thing that, well, Lebanese families, I think any family does, is make you feel guilty. I think when our kids were born, well, they left the hospital with this thing called a blue book, and you meant to go. When I was born, I think they gave Mum a How to Guilt Your Child book. And even if I ring Mum every day, it's not enough. So I will apologise if I do the rush. But I want to thank Matilda for not only a beautiful welcome or an acknowledgement, but sharing your story, but also the warmth and what it means to actually have an acknowledgement of country. And I do hope that we continue on that path that we really need to get to into the future. And I thank you so much for sharing that. And I love that you're an educator. That was a bonus. Of course, as it turns out, I've got this speech, and it was a 15-page speech. Then I made it into a one-page speech, and then I left my glasses in the car. So the good thing is I'm going to put that away. But Professor George, John, and all of the team here, Wester'ly and Western Sydney and Azadeh and Rhonda and Tanya and everyone who put this together, this is such an important thing. Charishma Kaliyanda is my parliamentary secretary, but also just an all-round top person who genuinely cares about what we're talking about today. And I can't go past and not acknowledge Patty Amphlett. Patty, it's so good to see you. We go back away when my young daughter was at a school that Patty was helping her learn how to sing. I want to thank you because she really annoyed us every night because of the work that you've done. So thanks very much for that, Patty. I did read the report. I had a look at it, and because it was just touching so much to the things that I believe in. And I'm going to try and not make this a speech about but a speech about the why. And why this is so incredibly important. The reason this is important is because I think it gets right to the heart of what we want to be as a society and where we're at the moment. And what's written here is different to what I'm going to say, which drives my staff absolutely crazy. But Fran and George touched on it. It's about the phones. See, if we go back to those days of COVID, lots of things happened, some good things and some bad things. And what we saw was a divide. And one of the things I constantly spoke about was a tale of two cities. But the other bit that I spoke about that maybe not too many paid attention to was this new thing called online learning and learning from home. And that worked really well if you had a computer at home, if you had a desk at home, if you had a quiet space at home. But if you were from a community like the one that I represent, and it's not all the same, but in the community that I represent, and you lived in a unit and it was 3 kids and 1 computer and pretty dodgy internet connection, how was that helpful? It wasn't helpful at all. We actually highlighted more of a difference, and I don't think we've actually recovered that space again. There were some great developments, the need to move things online, that was excellent. But unless everyone was accessing it, unless everyone benefited from it, then I don't think we did the right thing. And I think that gets to the very heart of the question about the type of society that we want. And every single one of us, and I'm preaching to a room of converted, every single one of us is here because we believe in equity. And equity is different to equality, because equality means you give everyone the same, but equity means you give people who need more. And so that you get everybody onto a level playing field. And when you've got that level playing field, then you've got that real starting point. And I'll talk about my history at the school. And the history at the school was about a place where no one believed in it, even the kids and the teachers and the community. And I'll never forget on my first day when a young man that I said in the playground under the jacaranda tree, that I haven't forgotten, and he said, "Why would you come to this place?" And I said, "Because I believe we can do some good things." And his response was actually heartbreaking, what he thought about the school. But I then said, "I want you to go to uni." And I'll never forget, he said, "People like us don't go to uni." And that kid, because here's the inspiring bit, he actually became a teacher and he works at Punchbowl Boys High School now, making that difference because not only someone believed in him and we told him about the aspiration, but we built that ladder for aspiration. Because we can give people dreams and we can say, this is what you can be. But unless we give them the means to get there, then all we're doing is we're just filling their heads with a bit of hope. And I don't think that's right, because that just makes us feel better, but it doesn't actually change anything. And we need to change things. And so the digital element there is so incredibly important. When I became the Minister for Digital Government, my daughter rang me up and said, "Dad, are you the Minister for Digital something?" I said, "Yes." She goes, "You're like the worst person in the world for that." And I said, "What are you talking about? I've got the Nokia 6210. I love it." And I actually said to her, "Sweetheart, I think I'm actually the best person for it." And of course, trying to convince her the reason why is because I'll see it from a different perspective. Because it's easy to get your head in the clouds, and it's easy to kind of just assume that everyone's the same and everyone's got the same luxuries that you have and the privileges that you have. But the advantage is I don't forget where I came from. I don't forget the community that I represent, and I don't forget the people that I've met. And the people that I've met, they don't want pity. They don't want you to feel sorry for them. They just want you to help them be able to achieve what they're capable of achieving and to be able to get to where they need to. And that's a mistake that sometimes people can make. Inadvertently, they put people down by saying, oh, I'm going to give you... They don't want that. They just want you to make their life a little bit better. So I changed the way that we looked at digital. And I'll give a shout out to my predecessor. He was very good at digital, but we're a very, very different breed, he and I. He's really into the gadgets. I'm into how does it work for people. So when I looked at this report, I thought, oh my God, I could have saved myself a year's worth of work for the digital strategy and just like somehow cut and paste and put it through ChatGTP and no one would have known. And all of a sudden I've got this new policy because it is absolutely perfect with what we are seeking. And it's a credit to you. And I read a lot of stuff, but this thing really struck to the very heart of it, that idea about how do we make it inclusionary and how do we make it equitable? And if we don't start with schools, then where do we start? Because for everyone who's got a dream and everyone who's got an aspiration, unless we actually give them the way to achieve that, then they're not reaching their full potential. They're going to stay where they are. And there's a lot of wealthy people in Greenacre, in my part of the world. A lot of wealthy people. And they want to stay in Greenacre. And they love living in Greenacre. And the reason they love living in Greenacre is because they love the community. And we've got to get beyond this idea that once you become successful, you move out to somewhere else. That's not the way it should be. You become successful with where you are. You can achieve everything where you are. If you've got the capacity to work from home, you can work from home everywhere. But why is it that people from low socioeconomic status communities don't get the chance to work from home? They don't get the chance to be able to do those jobs that can actually enable it. So what do we do as governments, for example? And because it's about, I told you the problems, here's the solution. The digital strategy, which I was really proud to launch about a month ago, and incidentally I've just discovered the same suit and the same tie because I saw a photo of it. I swear to you, I have changed my clothes since then. But obviously I like this tie and this suit. It's got 5 missions. They're not goals, they're not objectives, they are missions. And the very first mission, and to me the most important one, is the mission of inclusion and accessibility. Because unless we've got inclusion embedded into everything that we do and accessibility built into everything that we do, then why do we have all the other stuff? Because it doesn't mean that everyone's going to get it. So yes, the internet is ubiquitous. Digital government is ubiquitous. But how does it work? How does it work if it's not working for everyone? Why would we create a society where we're on the cusp and we're right through a revolution, but some people are going to miss out? And I think the challenge for all of us, and especially in government, is to make sure that not only identify the problem, but to fix the problem and to create the solution. And so one of the things, sounds simple, but I'm really keen on, is the device bank, and we're working on that. Do you know how much stuff in the public service gets updated all of the time, like the computers and the screens, and what happens to them? Where do they go? Why aren't we giving those away to families that need it, to people who need it, to be able to give that opportunity? Why aren't we expecting more from the telecommunications giants to make accessibility more affordable for families who can't afford it? Why aren't we looking at those things? So the reason I say with the why is because I've asked my agency to make these happen, to look at making sure that every single person can do it. Because whether you live in Broken Hill or you live in Bankstown or you live in, I don't know, Narrabeen or Narendra or any other place I could think of, it shouldn't really matter. If there's a service, you should be able to access that service. And this report goes right to the heart of it. And when we talk about education in particular, then it's about giving every young person that opportunity. You don't get to pick where you're born. You don't get to pick the family you're born to. You don't get to pick your circumstances as a kid. It's just the lot that you've got. So it's up to all of us to make sure that we give that young person every single opportunity to be able to meet the same outcome as any other person. Because until we've got that truly egalitarian society, then I don't think we're meeting our full potential, and we're not allowing young people to meet their full potential. And I want to conclude with one point I haven't even talked about. My gosh, my speech now. Okay, I'd like to begin by acknowledging... Sorry, comedian, it doesn't work, obviously. The other bit that I want you to watch out for, and this is the next step, is we've got the digital strategy with inclusion and accessibility as number one, the number one mission. And it's purposefully chosen as the mission because that is our mission. It has to be our mission. From that, everything else flows. The next part that's being pretty much at the end stages now is the inclusion strategy, specifically about inclusion. And it doesn't mean tell me what the problem is. How do we fix it? And how do we enable it? And how do we then make sure that every single person in our society has got the best chances? There are some really sobering statistics there, but they're real. And we need that data because that shows that it's missing out. We can't just assume because a kid's got Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram or TikTok that they've got digital skills and they're digitally connected. They're just connected to that little part of the world. What about the whole rest of that digital world? And as governments, we can't move everything to digital unless everybody can access it and be a part of it. And I want to just... Sorry, I didn't read any of my speech, but I'm sure we'll post it up somewhere. I want to finish with this story. I think about my mum. My mum and dad came here a little bit before yours, Fran, probably mid-70s, when I was only younger than I am now, a little bit. And they couldn't speak English at all. It's a typical migrant story. Couldn't speak English, come here, try a better life. Public education gave me everything that I have. And they did the whole factory thing and sacrificed and whatever. And they're really proud of my brothers and me every now and then too. But my mum, who's been here for 50 odd years, she still doesn't speak great English. She's good on WhatsApp. She's good on Facebook because she likes everything I ever post on Facebook. And I go, Mum, you like this post? I go, no, I just liked it because you're my son. And that's what you've got to do. So that's great. But I asked my people, my department, that everything they do to put the lens of my mum onto it. How would somebody like my mum access that? When my mum had to download the app to get her COVID vaccine, how could she do that? She couldn't do it. So she was at the risk of not getting a vaccine simply because it was made too difficult. And the thing is, if we want to have digital, we've got to make it digital, not for digital's sake, but for people's sake. That's where we never lose perspective of what this is about. I'm so glad to be here. Jan, I will deal with the family stuff later, but I'm going to be in big trouble. So excuse me when I run out and start panicking. But as you harassed me to be here, and I'm sorry it took so long to get back to you, but when I had a look at what it was, I couldn't not be here. And when I thought about that partnership between the university, between Wester'ly, between the Whitlam Institute, I thought this actually goes to the very core of not only everything that I believe in, but everything that's Western Sydney. And Western Sydney doesn't need pity. What Western Sydney needs is opportunity, and what Western Sydney needs is for someone to be the champion and to tell their story, because no one is better than anybody else. It's just that their circumstances aren't always the same. It's up to all of us to make those circumstances the best they can so that every single person can live not only their best life, but their most fulfilled life. So congratulations. It is a great honour to have been here. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Minister Dear. Wow, you gave a real motivational speech up here. I was like, I'm in. Whatever it is, I'm in. I'm down. I also noted you just mentioning your mum there at the end and the WhatsApps. The WhatsApps are big in the Lebanese community, for better or for worse, but there's a sense of connection, I think, that they find with being able to communicate over these sorts of technologies. And I think in many ways that translates to students as well. We think of access, we think of work, we think of people doing their homework and, using these devices to learn. But actually, if they don't have these devices in the best way that they could, they lose the connection they have to other people in class. And that then becomes about friendship, and it becomes about well-being, and it becomes about all of these sorts of bigger ripples as well. So that goes for your mother and for students alike. Our next speaker, it's a great pleasure to introduce, is Azadeh Dastyari. Now, a lot of you will know Az because she serves as the Director of Research and Policy at the Whitlam Institute. She's also a Professor of Human Rights Law, and her work has been dedicated to breaking down the barriers to opportunity and to challenging inequality, as well as amplifying the voices of communities that are made vulnerable, in particular by law and by policy. So we welcome Az to the stage. Professor Az.
Thank you so much, Jan, and thank you so much, Minister, for accepting the invitation to join us. It's such a privilege to be here today, and my job tonight is to tell you a little bit more about the report that we're launching. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Parramatta people of the Darug Nation. Thank you, Matilda, for that beautiful acknowledgement of country. As Matilda said, we acknowledge that digital inclusion and exclusion is a problem for First Nations peoples in Western Sydney as well, and it's something that we're very committed to tackling too. This report, the study that gave birth to it, was born out of necessity. I came back to Western Sydney in 2020 after a period of being elsewhere. And when I came back as a human rights lawyer, my first thought was, well, I need to find out what's going on here and how I can best serve my community. So I reached out to NGOs, service providers, anyone I could really, to see where the issues were. And this was 2020. And none of us are ever going to forget the upheaval that was 2020. So perhaps it was unsurprising that every person I spoke with said the most marginalised and vulnerable people, the very people that needed services, were the people that could not get in touch with anyone, including service providers. And the impact on education was particularly devastating, because students who didn't have access to technology, I'm going to call it digital inclusion, access to technology, ability to afford technology, and also the digital skills to use technology effectively and safely, the people who couldn't be digitally included, they weren't just falling behind in education, they were missing out on education entirely. And missing out on education isn't just unfortunate. It's a human rights violation. All of us have a human right to be offered the option of free education. But education can't be free if it relies on expensive internet and expensive devices. Education can't be universal if people cannot access it. So with the invaluable support of Associate Professor Tanya Notley, who you're going to hear from a little bit later tonight, and the partnership of Dr. Rhonda Itaoui, the Director of the Centre for Western Sydney, we joined Wester'ly, a group of community organisations fighting for digital inclusion in Western Sydney to try to better understand what the problem is. Now, many, many of you in this room helped us. And I'm very grateful for the support, the time, the skills, the knowledge that you shared with us. This report couldn't have been written without you. When we first started this study, we thought, hey, it's just a pandemic thing. We're going to study this and we're going to see this was this freak of nature. But after speaking with 445 school teachers, school leaders like principals and deputy principals, and also staff at schools, we learned that teachers have been worried about digital inclusion for a long time. This isn't a new problem. The pandemic just put a spotlight on it. What's more concerning is that lack of access to technology remains a deeply entrenched barrier for education for many, many people in New South Wales schools. What's more, digital inclusion isn't just a nice thing to have anymore, it's a necessity. Students need to have access to technology to do their homework, to collaborate on their projects, to do research, both at home and at school. And they need digital literacy because the world they are going into is being increasingly shaped by technology. This report contains far more data than I can go into in the short amount of time that I have with you tonight. But I hope you will read it in full. There are hard copies of the report available, and you can also scan the QR code in front of you and have an electronic version of the report as well. We've tried to make this report as accessible and as practical as we possibly could because we want you to use it. We want this report to have impact. I know everyone here cares deeply about our students and our young people. So please take what we've learned here and add to it with your own research. Use it in your work, use it in your advocacy, use it in your decision making. And if anyone wants us to go through the report with them, we're very happy to provide briefings as well. So just reach out to us. So let me just highlight a few key findings, the sobering statistics that the Minister referred to. Jan referred to this statistic at the beginning of tonight's proceedings as well. Very low levels of digital inclusion amongst vulnerable groups. Students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, Indigenous students, asylum seekers, non-English speaking background students, students with special needs and students with physical disabilities are not nearly as digitally included enough as they need to be to participate in their education. And digital exclusion has a very clear geographical barrier. If you live in Western Sydney, you are much more likely to be digitally excluded. So 24% for Western Sydney compared to 41% in the rest of Sydney. But we also can't forget regional New South Wales as well. Regional New South Wales also needs support. One issue that is really important is that students who are digitally excluded often have lack of support. So they're not getting the technical support they need at home either. And again, this is more pronounced in Western Sydney. What this statistic tells me is that we can't just address this for students. We need to have community solution. We need to tailor-make place-based solutions that address digital exclusion at a community level. And a lot of people today have been speaking about this particular statistic. The fact that so many students in Western Sydney don't have a laptop, probably don't have internet at home either. 37% of primary school and high school students in Western Sydney are using their mobile phones to do assignments, probably using Macca's Wi-Fi. And I want you to think about the impact that has and how these students are competing with students that have all the things in their homes. What we learned from COVID is that digital inclusion improved quite significantly. People had more access, mostly because, as you'll see in this graph, schools gave out dongles and devices. They weren't the only ones to do it. We also had private enterprise, charities, other people were giving out devices and internet as well, but that got all taken away once the lockdowns were over. The problem is that the need for that technology didn't disappear. And in fact, education changed during that time and teachers started to use online programs and homework started to be done more on computers. And there was this extra need for digital inclusion at a time when people were now more digitally excluded. Devices were taken away and then you had a cost of living crisis, which is really placing so many students at a disadvantage. Teachers are telling us that this isn't an issue that's going to go away. We need to do something about it now because it's going to become more of a problem. Overwhelmingly, teachers told us that we need to make sure that kids and young people have access to technology at home for their education. The other concerning thing that we found in our research is that teachers don't always know what they're dealing with their students. A third of classroom teachers didn't know whether or not students had decent internet connectivity at home. 28% of teachers didn't know about the levels of digital literacy of their students. Now, teachers are desperate for this information. They care so deeply about students and want to address this problem, but they need more support and they need more information. So the many findings in this report expose a really massive growing crisis, a crisis we need to address as soon as we can if we are not going to entrench inequalities for generations. So to address this crisis, we have some recommendations in our report. Some of these recommendations others have already spoken about. The first being that we can't assume students are digitally included. Not in our curriculum, not in the way we design policies. We have to take into consideration the fact that students may not have access to computers, may not be able to afford it, and may not be digitally literate. The second is that we need to meet the needs of students from all groups vulnerable to digital exclusion, all of the groups that I talked about before, but especially asylum seekers and refugees, because and students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, because these are the students that are the most digitally excluded on all of the metrics that we used for our study. As you might recall, asylum seekers and refugees, only 19% are digitally included. We need to implement comprehensive and targeted digital literacy programs in schools, not just for the students, but we need to reach out to parents as well. And we need to invest in digital infrastructure in Western Sydney and regional New South Wales, where high levels of digital exclusion are recorded. Minister Dibbs talked about device banks. That's one of the things that we recommend. We also recommend more public Wi-Fi, supportive libraries that are doing so much to enhance digital inclusion in our communities. And finally, we need to know more. We need to strengthen digital equity collection and data. The key message I hope you will take away from tonight is that digital inequity is a profound social inequity that is robbing young people and children of opportunities, of their dignity, of equality. Too many students in our states are not getting the education that they have a right to because they don't have access to devices, can't afford devices and the internet, or not digitally literate enough to do so. Now, this isn't just about devices and the internet, it's about the kind of future we're building. It's about what we're doing to our economy. It's about what we're doing to our society. Gough Whitlam said one of the most profound things I have ever read. He said that we are all diminished if any of us are denied a proper education. Well, digital inequity is diminishing us all. And we need to act decisively now to make sure that these students who are missing out are not left behind. Only then can we create the inclusive, equitable, and empowered future that they and all of us deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dastyari, and what a wonderful point to end on, I think. Beautiful, beautiful summation. Next up for you, we have a panel of experts who are going to delve a little bit deeper into the report, into some of its findings, and into some of the ways forward. So I'm going to invite our three panellists and also our moderator for the panel up to the stage. So Charishma Kaliyanda, the member for Liverpool, Associate Professor Tanya Notley, Jane Stratton, and Dr. Rhonda Itaoui. Take your seats. I'm going to, yes, round of applause, please. I'm going to start with Tanya. Tanya is from Western Sydney University School of Humanities, Communications, Arts and Institute for Culture and Society, and she specialises in media literacy and digital inclusion. Please give Tanya a round of applause. Next to Tanya is Jane, who is the CEO of the Think Plus Do Tank Foundation. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Great. That is a grassroots organisation that works to empower communities through innovation and inclusion. She's also a member of Wester'ly. Of course, they were partners on this report. So please welcome Jane. Charishma Kaliyanda MP is the member for Liverpool. She is also a very passionate advocate for community equity and inclusion and serves on the board of the Whitlam Institute. So welcome to Charishma. And finally, our moderator for this discussion is Dr. Rhonda Itaoui. She is also one of the authors of this report and the director for the Centre for Western Sydney. She's also a social researcher that specialises in human geography and multiculturalism. So welcome, Rhonda. Over to you.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you all for joining us tonight. It has been a very insightful evening so far. It's been great to delve into the report findings and, of course, hear from the Minister and our Vice-Chancellor on the importance of the findings, both on a policy level but also for us as a university and our role in delivering education for the region and for our communities here in Western Sydney. So I will start off with you, Charishma. I recall having a very insightful conversation with you in your local area about this very issue, and we were very excited to share the findings of this report with you in the lead up. So the community in Liverpool that you represent as a member of the Legislative Assembly has been identified in the study as having higher rates of digital exclusion compared to the rest of Sydney. And as we saw in Az's presentation, the geographical differences are quite stark, and that's something that really concerned us at the Centre for Western Sydney. So how does digital inclusion or exclusion impact communities in Liverpool and beyond?
Thanks, Rhonda. And it's such an important question, which is very much informed by the facts that this report reveals and the work that has gone into this report. And I, of course, start by acknowledging the Parramatta people of the Darug Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to First Nations people in this room, because Liverpool does have a sizable First Nations community, and some of, a lot of that community are very much at the pointy end of facing digital exclusion. And when I think about how that impacts our community overall, I think of it across sort of two levels. Firstly, in terms of the short-term or the sort of immediate-term impacts of digital exclusion, because we know and we've heard how digital exclusion results in the loss of opportunity, whether that is in terms of employment, development of skills, educational opportunity, and as a case in point, earlier today I was at a local primary school who were telling me that about 4 years ago, right in the midst of COVID, they sought to introduce music education, which so many children at this school had never been able to access previously. But because it was in the middle of COVID, they were unable to begin the implementation of this music education program because the children didn't have devices. And so that was another year that this, pretty vital part of the curriculum that others across, the rest of Sydney and in many other parts of our country take for granted, was not accessible to this group of young people. And then I also think about it in terms of the longer term or the sort of flow-on impacts for these young people into the future. And when you think of the impact from primary school and then into high school and then into tertiary or vocational education, there's research to suggest that the loss of those opportunities very early in life has compounds across that developmental span. So it's really important to look at that loss of potential. Right, so it's the long-term loss of potential for those young people in our community. And I also think about it in terms of not just the skills to access technology and be familiar with the devices that we use, but also the really fundamental skills that we all sometimes take for granted in terms of how we as human beings respond to technology. So, sometimes we think of those skills in the context of when we look at, for example, the discussion around the social media ban at the moment. How do young people develop resilience in an environment where they are bombarded with digital content from all ends, right? So when you lose out on those opportunities to build some of those skills early on, our young people at that sort of more developmental stage kind of start from a different point. And that's why I've long said that devices and our capacity to build those skills that are vitally important in a increasingly digitally connected world are just as important as roads, as airports, as any of the things that we sort of take for granted. 50 years ago, Gough Whitlam addressed the failure of urban planning in Western Sydney by enabling us to have sewage lines connected to parts of Western Sydney, and also then sort of really embedded this idea of education as a fundamental right, or access to tertiary education as a fundamental right that young people in Western Sydney could aspire to and could have a pathway towards. And it's interesting that 50 years on, we're having this conversation around the real importance of equity when it comes to digital access for the modern day. And the other sort of lens that I see the impact on our community is, who those young people then influence as well. In my inaugural speech to Parliament, I quoted one of the what's called 2168 children's parliamentarians. So in one of the areas of Liverpool which experiences significant socioeconomic disadvantage, there is an initiative that was championed by Mission Australia called the 2168 Children's Parliament, where 4 young representatives from different primary schools within that postcode area act as the representatives of that school. They, consult with their peers and they present the issues that are important to their peers in the Children's Parliament. And, the outcomes of that program are extraordinary. But I quoted one of the parliamentarians who said, as a 9-year-old, I sometimes get tired and sad because I have to translate for my parents all the time. And I get frustrated because sometimes I don't know all the words. And it is a feature of migrant and refugee kids, Jan's, Jihad's, my own, where young people often take the role of parents in navigating institutions, navigating governments, navigating the things that really make a fundamental impact on their daily lives. I still get contacts from children on behalf of their parents, sharing housing applications, who need help with Centrelink applications, all of these things that, linguistic literacy is important, but increasingly digital literacy is incredibly important as well. So when we look at exclusion for those young people, we're also excluding their parents and the broader family unit that they also act on behalf of so often within our community.
Thank you so much, Charishma. I think you've really touched on so many of the layers that we're really trying to interrogate, and the need for further research and data collection, because as we've uncovered, students that might come from those asylum seeker and refugee backgrounds or from low SES backgrounds, they are suffering from lower levels of digital inclusion, but the flow-on effects on their opportunities, but also on the family unit, they're really profound. And it is based on your community work that you can touch on that, but we need to continue to interrogate those links. Speaking of community, Jane, I'd love to speak with you. We know you're a very fierce advocate for the Western Sydney region. We partner with you on many of our projects, and you're one of the loudest voices. And we really value your commitment to the community, and we know that you're deeply embedded in your community. So we'd love to hear, based on your work in Fairfield, where we know it's one of the most digitally excluded regions in New South Wales. We'd love to just hear a little more about Wester'ly in particular, because I know you wear a few hats, and the role of place-based community-led initiatives in tackling digital exclusion in particular.
Thank you, Rhonda. I just wanted to also acknowledge the Parramatta clan of the Darug Nation and, like everyone, the really unique acknowledgement that you offered, Matilda. Thanks very much. And I wanted to acknowledge the long-term collaboration with Azadeh in particular and the partnership that she's enabled with the university and my colleagues from Wester'ly who are in the room. I really want to acknowledge the advocacy efforts actually of people whose job is around we don't call ourselves service delivery agents, but who work with community because, the work of meeting the need attending to the immediate need, as well as trying to connect that to a bigger picture is really difficult work. And I want to acknowledge the work of people who, with my colleagues at Think and Do Tank Foundation, have been able to do that so well. I don't intend to step through the asks of Wester'ly, but I would encourage you to go to westerly.org.au to have a look at the research that we've done and the asks that we make. But I'm going to touch on them, and I just want to build on what's already been mentioned rather than repeating ourselves and just echoing everything that's been said. So I think the nesting of this conversation inside education is really powerful, but of course it's a barometer of broader inequity. Like we're seeing what's happening for kids, and we can say that it's an indicator of much broader seams of inequity that cut across educational access, quality, even things like physical mobility, that the internet is also connected to. So it's you can't get an Uber if you can't get data. You can't probably afford an Uber if you don't have data. So there's all sorts of things that being well connected enables and disables if you're not. So I think that education is powerful because it's like the indicator of the type of society that we want, what we dream for ourselves, and also what we value. And I think that the really telling and worrying thing out of this research and what's so important is that graph that Azadeh showed of what's happened since COVID and how the enduring inequity and how easy it might be without work like this to take our eyes off that inequity. And the risk, because of the growing digitisation of government service delivery and ways of knowing, that people become invisible. And that's the problem. That we risk actually creating a striated democracy, like where people don't have equity in democratic participation. And that's the type of future that we might be building. So I think we've actually got a real question to ask ourselves about digital equity is not just about the technical connection and affordability, it's what it enables and what it disables and who it excludes. And increasingly it excludes the people who already experience deep vectors of exclusion and the people who are hardest to hear. So that's why it matters. And so the other really important thing out of this research is the last recommendation of investing in ways of knowing. So until 2016, the Commonwealth census asked us all to respond to, how are you going? Are you digitally connected? Do you have an internet connection? But in the census that happened in 2021, that question was removed. So we no longer have a population level way of knowing. We don't even know anymore who's disconnected or we can't, and if we don't understand the need, how can we service it? So there's been a displacement of ways of knowing into the non-government sector, into small charities, people who are precisely not equipped to ask the entirety of the population whether or not they're connected to the internet. So that's one really important thing to note. So there's a private, the Australian Digital Inclusion Index is the best knowledge that we have, and that is not granular enough. It erodes, I guess. It's it's an average rather than it doesn't give us the specifics, which is hard to say. So we've got some local insights in Fairfield. We're a tiny organisation. We're a team of about 10. We run a community house characterised by multilingualism, as you'd expect, in Fairfield. We are an arts organisation and a community and economic development organisation called the Think and Do Tank. And we've surveyed independently about 140, 150 members of our community since 2019. So we know that the pillars of digital inclusion, which are typically laid out as access, affordability, and ability to use the internet, access isn't the problem, right? Like, there is the internet. The issue is the affordability. And it's not even the digital literacy stuff is important, but it's not what we're hearing as the key need. It's still a need, but it's the affordability piece that is hardest to serve, and that's the piece in policy, planning and investment that's not being well served. So I guess our call is for growth through equity, not to divorce the two, that actually we are planning for a structural inequity and for an undemocratic society if we don't attend to this. I think the difficulty from a policy perspective is that it falls between the gaps of Commonwealth, state and local government, and that is the complex piece. I think that's where the action lies, in forcing all levels of government to join hands and to do this work, because definitely what we're seeing is the precarity of connection, and that people are prioritising internet even over food. We know from research from ACOS and others that low-income households are spending proportionately a lot more on technology and telecommunications and prioritising it because they recognise how important it is, but that costs those households, and that's definitely what our research shows. So as for what can be done, we definitely think that when you look at the other thing that this report makes really clear is the geographic clustering of need. And we know that in Western Sydney, it's possible you can map who's connected and who's not, right? So that's exciting from a policy and planning and investment perspective, because it means that we can make a big difference by making networks more available, low cost, free, in places of greatest need, places like 2168. Places like 2165, places like the postcode of Mount Druitt, which I've forgotten. So we know that those are the areas: Blacktown, Green Valley, Miller, and Fairfield and surrounds, eastern parts of the Fairfield LGA. So we know that there are that the SSBI, which is a Commonwealth initiative to connect people to the NBN, is a fantastic initiative. It's got the wrong. It has really difficult pathways to connecting. So we work in the most the most digitally connected place in Western Sydney. We've only been able to connect 18 people to the SSBI initiative, and we know that that's not reflective of the need. That's because of the eligibility requirements. So there's some reform to be done there, and some pressure to be placed on NBN Co, who we know have a performance indicator of how many new connections they can achieve. Why not give it away to low-income households, right? We know that Centrelink and Department of Human Services could do a lot more in terms of the devices. We know that data banks, even though, colleagues like Workventures, the Smith family, are advocating for refurbished devices, we know that the failure rates are really high, and that we're giving devices that risk failing to people who are the least equipped to advocate for themselves. So, one in the data out of Western Australia, where there's been a similar experiment, is that up to about 20% of the devices distributed as refurbished have failed. Why do that? Why not just buy low-cost devices, service them, give them out to enable, to solve the problem rather than creating another one? And I'll come to the end. I know time is running short.
Yeah, you're good.
Also, there's a restriction, there's a problem in New South Wales government, which is that funding is not available. We can't get funding for data, we can't get funding for devices. So without that support, the tools that might be at our disposal in terms of closest connection to the community are disabled. That's arbitrary and unnecessary. And the last is, place-based and infrastructure analysis, so that wherever we build a building, a road, a railway station, a lift, wherever there's the Internet of Things, there should be an equity dividend. There should be Wi-Fi that's thrown out and given to the public. We should be looking in every spend for a connectivity dividend and an equity dividend. And in that way, we'll be building in structural and systemic ways for inclusion and equity and for a stronger democracy. And I guess multilingual, I mean, where do you want me to go with that? I mean, multilingualism is the whole other overlay of this, right? That, the federal government, for instance, funds training programs for digital literacy, but who are they for? They're for people who are older than 50, so none of the people typically who have kids at school, and they're all in English. So you can see right there that's a huge structural exclusion of a lot of people. That's our call. I mean, I think that the challenge for tonight is how do we join hands to take all the wonderful, inspiring words and the deep understanding of inequity and turn it into action, turn it into something by which we can hold government to account and not allow this issue to fall between the three layers of government any longer. And so with that, I mean, Wester'ly is a really great coalition of community organisations and individuals, and I'd encourage you to join us. You can do that at westerly.org.au if you'd like to be a part of this work. And I just want to just acknowledge again the educators, how amazing, 445 of them responding in such a crowded work schedule. That's just simply amazing. And thank you for the opportunity to share our perspective.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane. I think really reflecting on the tail end of your contribution in particular, some of the solutions that you provided really are a testament to the community-led solutions that are embedded in our region. And it was for that reason that working with Wester'ly was so incredibly important and critical to the success of this research and also its application and the way in which those recommendations can hopefully translate into tangible outcomes based on need and based on the insights of those organisations that form Wester'ly. And thank you for your partnership on this work with us. We really appreciate it. You did touch, Jane, on affordability as one of the critical issues in Fairfield in particular. And Tanya, I'd love to elaborate on that issue in particular. I know you have been an author of this report with us, and you've really written quite extensively on digital inclusion, and it's been a real honour to work with you as an expert on this in this field and to think about how some of your expertise in particular in Western Sydney could be brought into this report. So your previous studies really support our findings in particular around socioeconomic disadvantage being a very significant contributor to digital exclusion. Can you elaborate on this from your perspective and the previous work that you've been involved in, and also some of the solutions as well that we can carry forward leaving this room tonight?
Sure. Thank you, Rhonda. It's really great to be in this room with such a great mix of educators and community organisations and researchers, and I really hope something can come from this tonight. Digital inequity between low and high income households has persisted ever since we've been measuring it in the mid-1990s. It hasn't changed. It will not change without action. In Australia, you mentioned we have the Australian Digital Inclusion Index. Last week, Telstra launched a Youth Digital Index. They both show that income is the main inhibitor of digital inclusion. And it's a real problem for young people. It shows that 15% of young people 14 to 17 don't have a laptop or a desktop to use. That's not okay. It's really critical, as we've heard from other people today. More than 1 million young people are relying only on their data that they've got on their phone, not good enough. And more than half say they're not actually getting digital skills they need at school. So we've got major problems there, and we know it. And yet we've had 20 plus years of this research telling us this consistently, and yet we have no national program to address this issue. We have no national broad device bank or subsidy program. Many countries have broadband subsidy programs. So the US, the UK, many countries in Europe make it affordable to have broadband. And we're not doing that in Australia. And Jane mentioned the pilot program that's been run out. It is very limited who is eligible. Not enough people know about it. But it's not enough. It's a pilot program. And, we really need to move beyond that. in 2021 to 2023, I worked on a national research project called Advancing Digital Inclusion in Low-Income Households. And it was a research project where we over the 3 years, worked with 30 families from far north Queensland right down to Tasmania. And we were visiting those households during the COVID period and beyond regularly to understand what family needs were in terms of technology, what their experiences were. And what we found is that parents were really forced to deal with this issue of needing digital inclusion, and sometimes were going to great lengths to make sure it was happening, but at a real cost and at a real burden. And I call it a double burden, because not only were they forced into that position of getting technology that they really couldn't afford, but on top of that, they weren't being given any support themselves to link them to the social services, which are increasingly digital. And if I could maybe just share two of the stories from that research. One single mother of three, and I call her Layla, an anonymised name in the research. When COVID began and people were saying there's probably going to be lockdowns, there might be periods at home, at school, she was really worried about how she was going to manage this with her mobile phone. So she saw an advertisement with a telco about a package deal, and she went ahead and got that deal for an iPad, a phone, and internet connectivity. What that meant, that completely unaffordable package that she locked herself into for 3 years, was that she was paying 1/3 of the entire money she had after paying her rent every month, $170 a month for that. And she tried to get out of it multiple times. She'd been in Australia for 5 years and had limited English, and she'd given up trying to do that and felt she just had to wear it. But she was very clear that this was coming at the cost of healthcare for her children and of food. This was something that she was really struggling with, this burden, this cost. And then another single mum of two, who I call Mitra, she also arrived 5 years ago in Australia as a refugee, and she was struggling with every aspect of life when we visited her. She was really isolated, and she really, really believed that if she could have the internet at home, that would really help her connect with the children's education and the schools. It would help her learning English. It would help her get some training to get a job. It would help her connect with people because she was so isolated. And what I could really see is that digital inclusion was really leading to severe forms of social exclusion. She couldn't get the vouchers that were available for food, that people who didn't need it got during COVID. She wasn't getting those vouchers. She wasn't getting the sports vouchers that she really wanted for her children. So we worked out how to get those sports vouchers, and she said, right, I want my kids to learn to swim. So then we called up the local pool because we were unable to kind of do this digitally and needed a card from her. She'd had a credit card, and she'd have to commit to all these extra weeks. And so, we called up the pool. It's a local government pool, and said, look, if we come down there and just complete the forms, not online, but just while we're down there, and give you the money, the extra money that would be required for those lessons, can we do that? And we were told, no, you won't be able to do that. And so, when you're with people who have language barriers and digital exclusion, you realise that social services at all levels, it was great to hear Minister Diab say that he is getting people to think about his mother first, because that's not how social services are designed. No one thought about the experience that these mums would be having, the people that could benefit most from those social services. So, repeatedly we just saw the link between digital exclusion and social exclusion, and, the real poor design of social services, which is only going to increase. So, this is an issue that we have to address, and, it's a really what I call an unjust burden that's being put on families, low-income families, to address this. It was great to connect with this research, because I do think what's happening in schools is a research gap, and there's more that needs to be done there, because it's a place where we could be addressing that inequity that exists in the home. And I get really worried about the growing divide between schools, particularly between state and private schools, that appears to be growing in terms of not just devices, but also tech support and tech training.
Great, thank you. Such a great way to close off the discussion, especially kind of bringing us back to some of the themes we heard earlier, that the internet, digital inclusion, digital access needs to be seen as a necessity in everyday life. And without that access, we continue to further entrench disadvantage and further widen the disparities that we have recorded in the past and may record in the future. I could sit here all night and hear you all speak and continue to contribute your perspectives, but we have sadly run out of time, and I am on time for once, for those who know me. So it's 30 minutes on the dot. So we will close off this discussion and I'll hand back over to Jan. I just wanted to thank you all for the great discussion, for sharing your insights and bringing together your unique perspectives from research, community and government, really reflecting the different stakeholders that we need to work together in tackling some of the key issues that we've recorded in this report.
Well, only one mistake's been made tonight that I know of, and that is from Az, who said, kick off the thank yous to people by introducing yourself. Now, it's a terrible mistake to invite any politician or former politician to introduce themselves. I know this from the very bitter experience I've had when others have been offered that opportunity and, roll out the sleeping bag, settle in, because it takes a very long time. But I promise you that won't happen with me. But my name's John Faulkner and I'm the chair of the Whitlam Institute. And let me assure you, it's a really great privilege for me to have the role tonight of saying a very big thank you to all those involved in this evening's digital equity and education launch. And as Rhonda mentioned in the panel discussion, I think the really important thing to remember here is that this report is a collaboration. And like all successful collaborations, it's received the full support of all the partners involved. The Whitlam Institute, the Centre for Western Sydney and Wester'ly. And what this collaboration is about, I think, as you've heard, is an absolutely fundamental social issue, the provision of equitable educational opportunity in our increasingly digital world. And I think we've had great contributors, I'm sure you agree with me tonight, who've really laid it on the line. We cannot have equitable education if every student does not have the access to the same tools. You can't have equitable education if some students can't afford the same technology as others. If some students don't have the same access as other students. If some students don't have the ability to use the technology as safely as some others. And we really know as a result of this important report that reliable and affordable internet and devices, along with the ability to use the internet safely, are absolutely crucial for students' success in the modern classroom and, of course, beyond in the lives they live. And I think the other really critical thing for probably all of us in this room is that we also know that students here in Western Sydney are so many students here are disadvantaged through digital exclusion. And you've always got to call out that sort of discrimination and disadvantage. You've always got to not only call it out, but insist that it's addressed. And at the Whitlam Institute, as you probably know, we strive to promote the great Whitlam principle of ensuring equality of opportunity for all. And of course, very much that includes equality of educational opportunity. We know that we must never resile from doing all that we can to ensure that every student has access to the quality education that they deserve. And that's regardless of where they live, regardless of their background, regardless of their circumstances. And that's certainly what I took out of this report when I read it. And I'm very, very grateful, as I'm sure all of you are, for all those who've shared their understanding, their knowledge and their professionalism with us this evening. A sincere thanks to our speakers, beginning with Jan, of course, who I am so in such a digital laggard that you lost me when you started to talk about memes. That I'd be the only person in this room who doesn't know what a meme is. But you've convinced me to go and Google it, because it's one of the things I can do. Okay. So, but thanks to Jan, thanks to the Vice Chancellor of Western Sydney University, George Williams, who's doing an enormous amount to in the social inclusion area, which is really critical, and working very hard at a senior level for a more equitable society. Thanks, of course, to my friend and colleague Jihad Dib, to Az and Rhonda as the authors of this report. That's a wonderful contribution, of course, and to our simply fantastic panel for what I thought was a really interesting and very important discussion. So thanks to all of those contributors. Thanks also to the many people who've worked behind the scenes to make tonight such a resounding success. It includes Nina Frickberg, Danielle McInnes and all our colleagues at both the Whitlam Institute and the Centre for Western Sydney. So a big thanks to them. And in a moment, I'm going to invite everyone to join us for refreshments and to continue our conversation, and I'll be able to share with you my knowledge about these areas. But before we do that, I just ask everyone to really please join with me in showing our appreciation to everyone who's been responsible for organising this event and participating here this evening in a launch of a report that I am absolutely convinced is soon going to be regarded as a truly significant and groundbreaking case study on digital equity and education. Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate it.